Society Matters.
Welcome to Habits of a Whole Heart. This is Arnie Herz, your host, and we are on HMTV. Thank you for tuning in. And today, I'm very happy to have a longtime friend and business colleague, Susan Crossman. Susan is an internationally best-selling author, writing coach, and she brings together a tremendous amount of wisdom in the field of healing and self growth and helping others grow and become absolute best they can become. I met Susan a few years ago through another author, and I was sharing with this author how I had this book idea that I wanted to bring to life, but I was so intimidated that I didn't even know where to begin. And she said 2 words, Susan Crossman. So I reached out to Susan and we hit it off. It's been an incredible journey, as Susan has been my book coach, as I'm now 80% of my way through the manuscript known as Habits of a Whole Heart. And so now in Habits of a Whole Heart have as part of this book process, created this podcast episode, this podcast series. And in this podcast series, it's bringing in real life examples that will then enhance and help us finalize the book manuscript. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us from Toronto. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, actually, I just moved to a little town on the east coast of Lake Huron called Grand Bend, Ontario. And I'm a 3-minute walk from the beach now. So I've given up Toronto in favor of nature.
Wow. 3-minute walk from the beach by Lake Huron, and it's December 3rd. This tells me that you are Canadian and not American, because that sounds very, very cold to me.
It is, but it's gorgeous.
That's great. Excellent. Well, thank you for joining in. And I know that you just won a very, very prestigious award. You won the gold medal in this international competition of helping women authors find their voice. Could you tell us a little bit about the award?
Very honored to, and thank you for mentioning that, Arnie. I'm very honored to have won the Gold Award for Literature from an organization called the Women Changing the World. And this is an international organization based in Australia that honors women who really are wanting to make a difference in the world through their work, through their spiritual practices quite often, through their healing practices, and really dedicated to helping all of us live better lives. So it was a real honor to win that award. The award ceremony was in London, England this past spring. And so I got a chance to connect with women from all over the world doing all kinds of magnificent work. So yeah, it was just amazing for me.
Susan, congratulations. And that's really beautiful. And I think you were sharing how many of these women you met, the ability to express themselves through literature is not to be taken for granted, because in many of these cultures, it's not something that women do or allowed to do.
Yeah, Arnie, that was one of the big outcomes for me of attending this event, was to see myself in a bigger pond of people and realize just how privileged and advantaged I've been as a woman in North America. That I've never thought twice about throwing my hat in the ring in any kind of environment and doing the work that I do and so on. And yet I met women who have had to really struggle for their opportunities in a way that I've never had to. So it was very humbling for me, and also helped me understand too the commonality of the yearnings we have as human beings, women particularly, but I think men too have the same experience of yearning for expression and yearning to share what we've learned and tell our stories in ways that will be healing for us, of course. And I think that's something a lot of people don't realize about the book writing process, how transformative it is, or can be. It not necessarily is, but and how much our stories unite us. So yeah, I'm just learning all the time.
Beautiful. So you've studied neurolinguistic programming and other healing arts. And so when you're speaking about how helpful it is in healing and growth-filled process, why is that? Like why is it important to express oneself?
Wow. I mean, I go back to one of my favorite books, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I think that's one of the things that he really hit on in his book. Wonderful, wonderful book. I think that writing a book helps us find meaning in our lives. It uncovers meaning and helps us look at our lives in new way. Right? Writing a book and reading a book are, they're two sides of the same coin almost, but very different experiences. But I think in writing our books and telling our stories, we understand new meaning. We derive new meaning from our experiences. We get to see our lives in new ways and get aha moments that are healing. I'm working on my 7th book right now. And so I've written fiction and nonfiction, and this book is a memoir about my first book, of writing my first book. And you mentioned at the beginning kind of that uncertainty that an author has. I was a professional writer with decades of great national and international experience as a professional writer. When I sat down to write that first book, I was beset by imposter syndrome and who am I to write a book? And it became a 13-year journey. And so here I am, fast forward, I'm working on my 7th book, which tells the story of that first book. And I'm getting aha moments all the time. I'm getting healing moments through the writing of this, now my 7th book. It's just remarkable to me that in examining our lives, we get the chance to experience growth.
Well, that's beautiful. It's interesting you mentioned Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. I don't know if you know this, but the studio it's HMTV, the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center of Glen Cove. And the Holocaust Memorial Tolerance Center here on Long Island hosts this studio and has created a series of podcasts as part of what's called the Humanity Matters series. And this podcast, Habits of a Whole Heart, is just one of many podcasts. There's been, I believe, well over 400 episodes overall. This is now the 24th episode of Habits of a Whole Heart. But when you talk about Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, of course, was a survivor of the Holocaust. And that search for meaning, that search for purpose is so central to our purpose here on life, that we are here for a purpose. It's a foundational belief of Habits of a Whole Heart that I am created to fulfill a certain purpose, a godly purpose. And that, as you say, in searching to understand our lives, oftentimes we don't really know what that purpose is. We don't really know who we are. We don't understand ourselves. And I think what you're saying through Viktor Frankl's words is that through the process of writing a book, we learn things about ourselves that we never knew, both the experiences and what they mean, or how we give meaning to the experiences in a positive way, and what really we're here to do. And I think that's a very beautiful process.
Well, thank you for that, Arnie. And I'm so glad you brought God into it, because that is a pivotal part of how I see the book writing process, is that if someone has felt that book tapping them on the shoulder and they kind of want to write a book and they're a little intimidated by the process, I invite people to consider this, that every single thing that has ever happened to you in your entire life has been a facilitation by God, has been God leading you through your life. And whether it's the good things or the bad things or the family you were born into or the educational experiences you've had and the relationships, and all of those things create of us the funnel through which that book is meant to flow. And so I see it as very much a God facilitated process. This authoring process really deeply has the hand of God in the process itself. So in terms of dealing with that self-doubt that just about everybody I've ever worked with has dealt with, that I also invite people to consider that this is your work. This is part of your mission that God has intended for you. And so there's no point in being afraid of it or worried that you're not good enough, because God has called you into this. And so, of course, you're good enough. Of course, you are the person to write this book. So lean into that, surrender to it.
I love this concept. And, in Judaism, we have this concept called hashgacha pratis. And it means that everything is ordained from on high. Everything is happening for a reason. And it's to teach us something, to help us grow, to help us emerge. And what I hear you saying, which I never thought of before, is that writing a book, in a sense, is a therapeutic, growth-filled process that helps us understand all of the different aspects and experiences of our lives to knit together a whole sort of artwork, tapestry of our lives, to understand, wow, this, I don't understand what that meant. And you start connecting the dots. And it was like, I have a new grandchild, and he's not quite ready at the connecting your dots phase. He's 6 weeks old. But we'll get to that connecting the dots, and you're just going to see dots on a paper. But then when you start connecting it, it makes something. And I think that what you're saying is that this book writing process really helps us understand ourselves and our lives in a deeper way. And that certainly has been my experience in working with you, notwithstanding my own imposter syndrome and doubts and hesitations.
Yeah. And do all of that and put it into service of humanity. So take this one precious life we've been given, write the books that we're here to write relating to this one precious life, and then take that book and serve humanity with it. And I think there's just something so magnificently grand and majestic about all of that God has figured out for us. We haven't had to invent this. This is just part of what we are a part of when we are writing those books. And in our humanness, we are afraid. We're vulnerable. Writing a book is one of the most courageous things I think people can do, because it's such a vulnerable process. And yet, when we understand this as part of God's work, part of our work in God's world, then you can't fail. There's no failure, because God has set us up for this. So, it's just so much fun to be doing this work.
Yeah. So, one of the things too is, like, as you know, one of my doubts was, I'm going to put all this time and energy into the book and no one's going to read it. And so you say service of humanity. And what I've come to understand in this process is that the first thing is it's transforming me. It's giving me a level of clarity and growth and moving and really moving beyond fears and limitations and growing to a different place. So already that's transformative. And wherever any of us go, each of our listeners, everyone here, you and I, wherever we go, we're impacting other people, whether we know it or not. Our family, our friends, people that we just happen to meet in an Uber car, the Uber driver, airplanes. So we're constantly impacting people. So if we're carrying a higher level of wisdom, a higher level of connectedness, a higher level of confidence, that is going to radiate out to everyone that we talk to, even if nobody reads the book. Then, of course, if someone reads the book, even if it's one person who's impacted by it, it's an incredible feeling. As I think I shared with you, I launched this podcast about 6 months ago, but I officially announced it on my Facebook and X and Instagram on Thanksgiving a few days ago. And to my great surprise and delight, I've had, of the video clips that we've posted, we've already had 1,500 views. So that's really meaningful. If just 10% of those people, 150, feel impacted, and it shifts their energy, shifts their day, shifts the way they think about themselves, it's already had a tremendous impact. So thank you for helping me get to where I am right now.
Such an honor. Such an honor.
I think that, go back to the creative process. You were saying that women, and I'm sure there's men too, but women particularly who have not had that opportunity in other parts of the world. And by not having the ability to write, the reverse is true. They haven't been able to hasn't been as easy for them to find out the essence of what their life is about and their mission. And as I shared in a previous podcast, it's the need to create is such a human need. And I think you speak about that. Such a human need that it's as though you can't exhale. You need to be able to exhale as part of the breathing process. But if you're unable to express yourself, it's like suffocating. And so I know you talk about, this human need of expression. And so could you share a little bit about that?
Oh, for sure. I love that way of looking at it, that it's as though you can't exhale. Preventing yourself from creating is preventing yourself from breathing. I absolutely love the way you look at that, Arnie. It really just speaks to me so deeply. And yeah, I think we are creators. People are creators. And whether it's art or poetry or literature or nonfiction books or whatever your modality is, surrendering to the creative process is part of becoming whole as human beings, I think. When we talk about wholeness, part of that wholeness is creation. And we are creatures of creation as well. We have been created. So there's such a wholeness and a circularity to that whole concept that I think if when we stop creating is when we run into trouble in our hearts and in our lives.
Very, very interesting. So this whole creative process is, in a sense, what I hear you saying is that when you talk about God, you talk about a higher power, is that some energy is flowing through us that is helping us think. And it's almost like a power outside of us, beyond us, that we're able to attract in. And you hear about this in the world of sports, where athletes feel an energy moving through them, or as you said, anyone in the creative field, architecture, art, science, music. And I think that human beings have largely lost contact with that creative, godly energy. And through the book writing process or any kind of a creative endeavor gives you the ability to channel that through. How does that sound to you?
I love it. Yes. And probably anybody who has ever thought about working on a book and sat down to try it, or people who are working on a book, I've had this experience, and I bet you have too, where you sit down to write and you don't know what comes over you. It's just, everything flows out of you and it comes out onto the page beautifully. And you read it later and you go, wow, did I actually write that? And in writing, we have an expression, well, we just held the pen. That this was our higher power. People describe it differently, of course, but that we are holding the pen for God in those moments. And then we also have those moments where we sit down to write and nothing works. You hem and you haw and you can't get started, and you write something and it isn't what you wanted to, so we've had those very different experiences in writing. And I think those downloads, we sometimes call it, are from our higher being, from our higher source, coming through us, flowing through us, so that we can be the vehicle of the wisdom that we're here to share in the world. That's part of being here as writers, as authors, as creators. That's part of that wholeness that we come back to time and time again, as being our whole self is about creating.
Beautiful. So when you talk about whole self, tell me a little bit more what that means to you.
Oh, well, I'm reminded of a story from that first book that I mentioned earlier that brought me back to this wholeness. As a professional writer, I really wanted to write a book. But, it's great to be paid to write, but the big dream was to become an author. And I talked about it for a really long time to my husband, and as couples do, oh man, I really want to write a book. And if only I could write a book. And one day he said to me, you've been talking about writing a book for a long time. And I said, oh, yes, I really want to write a book. And he said, what's stopping you? And that went into my prefrontal cortex with the strength of a freight train. Like it was, what? What's stopping me? Well, nothing's stopping me except myself. And from a wholeness perspective, for many years, while I was not starting to write a book, I was preventing that part of that creative part of me from being my partner in my life, that I was not whole because I wasn't permitting myself to create the books that I'm here to create. And so for me, wholeness is embracing all of who we are, the good parts and the not so great parts. You know, we all have that kind of shadow self that comes out every now and then, and maybe a lot for some of us, but that it's okay to be human, because that's who we are. We're human. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. Some days we're great writers, some days we don't write so well. Some days we write wonderful things that are stirring and interesting and valuable, and some days we don't. And so embracing that whole process in our lives, integrated deeply into our lives, to me is wholeness, is not judging any part of us that we may be disappointed in, but using it as a springboard to learn from and to do better, to amplify the goodness through the exercise of maybe the not so good stuff. But that's part of being human, is to not be perfect.
Right. When I'm hearing you too, is I'm imagining like a flower that's ready to bud, but it's being held in a very tight cage. And it can't open up its petals. And I think we have these cages that we've created. Of course, there's structural change cages, like you talk about the women in certain parts of the world who don't have the ability to write because it's not culturally or legally allowed. And then we talk about, but for almost everybody, there's mental cages. I'm not good enough. It's a waste of time. You know, all those doubts that happen. I don't know how to tap into myself. You know, I'm not really interested in creative. It feels too spiritual. I'm more interested in sports and just watching things and entertaining. So we have these things that hold us back. And what you're talking about really is getting rid of the cage and allowing who we are to just blossom to the way we need to be. And what I've learned, you know, I'm a follower of American history and world history and great leaders. And I know everyone has different political opinions today, so this is not a political opinion, but when a former world leader has dedicated their lives to being an artist, like Winston Churchill, who did hundreds of paintings, and he was a known artist while he was prime minister during the most challenging times in England's history during World War II. And then after the presidency, George W. Bush, who became an artist and did portraits and quite accomplished as well. And I find that very interesting, very cerebral people allowing some creative aspect to flow through art. And I have a friend who just produced a documentary, and it's about discovering the artist within and unlocking it. So I'm thinking that he doesn't know yet until I send him this clip of his podcast that we're going to have him on as a guest of the podcast. So anyway, this whole sense of letting go of the cages, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're on to something there. Definitely. Those cages we carry around within us so often. And again, I see that over and over and over in my work as an author coach and as an editor, is that often I'll talk to somebody, they think they might want to write a book. So we have a call to see what that might look like. And I've talked to a lot of people who, when I asked the question, so how long have you been thinking about writing a book? And I have talked to many people who have said 40 years. And it's so sad to me that they have waited 40 years to allow the unblossoming of this beautiful creative project and their own blossoming as well. And so that's, but also evidence again of the cages we hold within us, because you've got to figure over 40 years, there's got to be an opportunity somewhere in there when you could prioritize that creative project within you. Can I share some statistics that I find really interesting, Arnie?
You can, but you can't right now. Here's why. We are at the end of episode number 1. So I would love to invite you back for episode number 2. And I would love to hear the statistics. And in full transparency, I think I've been working on my book project for many years. And it would be interesting for you, and totally unscripted, to run through some coaching questions you would have for me to get to the next phase. And this way our listeners could actually see what it looks like and see how that might be helpful for them in their lives. What do you think of that?
On. Sure, I'd love that.
This brings us to a close of our first episode with Susan Crossman, who is a internationally awarded author, coach, healer. So Susan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Once again, my name is Arnie Herz, and I am your host of Habits of a Whole Heart as part of the Humanity Matters series of podcasts on HMTV. Thank you for tuning in, and please connect with us through social media. It's Arnie Herz, Habits of a Whole Heart, and you could also find susancrossman.com. And there will be notes in the podcast episode. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for our next episode.